To understand religion, we must stop asking what it reveals about God and start asking what it reveals about ourselves. This shift in perspective captures the essence of Sigmund Freud's critique. For millennia, organized religion has shaped civilizations, grounded moral systems, and offered meaning in the face of mortality. But for Sigmund Freud, religion was not the answer to life's deepest questions. It was a problem disguised as a cure. In Freud's view, religious belief was not the product of divine revelation or rational inquiry, but a psychological construction, an illusion shaped by fear, dependency, and unresolved emotional needs. Rather than revealing truth, religion functioned as a collective neurosis, a shared psychological defense that shielded individuals from the harsh realities of life. While it offered comfort, Freud believed that it did so at the expense of intellectual clarity and psychological autonomy.
Religion is an illusion, and it derives its strength from the fact that it falls in with our instinctual desires. The whole thing is so patently infantile, so foreign to reality, that to anyone with a friendly attitude to humanity it is painful to think that the great majority of mortals will never be able to rise above this view of life.
This video explores Freud's critical critique of religion, not as a philosophical rejection of God, but as a clinical diagnosis of belief itself. What drives religious faith? What does it reveal about the human psyche? And what does it mean to call religion a neurosis shared across cultures? Sigmund Freud was born in 1856 in what is now the Czech Republic. Freud lived in the crossroads of cultural tension and religious authority. Though his family was not devout, his Jewish identity marked him as an outsider in a society dominated by Christian institutions and increasingly shaped by nationalists and anti-Semitic currents. This marginal position sharpened his critical eye towards religious orthodoxy, not only as a private belief system, but as a powerful social force that shaped behavior, imposed moral codes, and demanded conformity. It is likely within this context that Freud developed a lifelong skepticism of religious authority, viewing it not simply as a spiritual tradition, but as a mechanism of psychological and cultural control. His invention of psychoanalysis introduced concepts like the unconscious, repression, and the Oedipus complex. Freud believed that what we think of as rational thought is only the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the surface churn our desires, traumas, and fears. And for Freud, religion was one of the most powerful and revealing expressions of these unconscious processes.
The conscious mind may be compared to a fountain playing in the sun and falling back into the great subterranean pool of subconscious from which it rises.
At its core, Freud argued religion is wish fulfillment. Just as a child invents monsters or comforting fantasies to make sense of the unknown, adults do the same with gods. In his book, The Future of an Illusion, Freud describes religion as an illusion, a belief born out of deep emotional needs, not rational evidence. The world is dangerous, nature is cruel, death is inevitable. Faced with all of this, the human mind creates gods, divine protectors, judges, and father figures to impose order on chaos. Religion, in this sense, serves as a psychological refuge, a system of belief that protects the individual from confronting the full force of human vulnerability.
The gods retain the threefold task. They must exorcise the terrors of nature. They must reconcile men to the cruelty of fate, particularly as it is shown in death, and they must compensate them for the sufferings and privations which a civilized life in common has imposed on them.
For Freud, this was not simply a poetic description of belief, it was a clinical diagnosis. Religious ideas serves to ease existential fear by transforming a threatening, chaotic world into one governed by intentional protective forces. By projecting divine will onto the forces of nature, the human mind gains a sense of control. In the face of mortality, religion offers narratives that render death less final and more tolerable. And in response to the sacrifices demanded by civilization, its rules, its renunciations, religion compensates with moral justification and the promise of reward. In this sense, religion functions as a protective illusion, a psychological construction that shields the mind from unbearable realities, even at the cost of self-deception. One of Freud's most radical ideas was that the belief in God mirrors a child's relationship with their father. The child, vulnerable and afraid, idealizes the father as all-powerful, all-knowing, and protective. As adults, Freud believed we carry that longing into religious belief. God is the idealized father, moral authority, source of comfort, and punisher of wrongdoing. He argued that religious devotion is a form of prolonged childhood dependency.
The gods retain the features of the father, and the religious believer's relation to his God remains that of a child to his father.
Freud draws a direct line between religious belief and early developmental psychology. In early life, the father is experienced as both protector and authority, a source of comfort, but also of fear and limitation. Freud argued that this complex relationship becomes internalized and unconsciously projected onto a divine figure in adulthood. God, in this framework, is not a metaphysical being, but a psychological substitute, an exalted version of the Father who offers security, moral guidance, and the illusion of permanence. Religious obedience, therefore, reflects a persistence of infantile needs, an unwillingness and perhaps an inability to relinquish the psychological posture of the dependent child.
Religion would thus be the universal obsessional neurosis of humanity, like the obsessional neurosis of children. It arose out of the Oedipus complex, out of the relation to the father.
As this quote suggests, Freud didn't just see religion as an individual fantasy, he saw it as a collective neurosis. Like an obsession or compulsion in an individual, religious rituals repeat symbolic actions to manage internal conflict. These acts, to Freud, echo the repetitive behaviors of neurosis. Religion becomes a socially sanctioned obsession. Its rituals and prohibitions are symbolic expressions of repressed impulses, especially those rooted in guilt, sexuality, and aggression.
If one listens to the statements made by intelligent observers, one gets the impression that religious practices are to a large extent, if not entirely, manifestations of obsessional neuroses, and that neurotic ceremonials have taken over the whole field of religious ritual.
Freud's theory about the psychological origins of religion begins in Totem and Taboo, where he proposes a mythic scenario to explain the early developments of moral and religious systems in what he called primitive human societies. He imagines a primal tribe dominated by a single, powerful father figure who held absolute authority. The young males, or sons, were excluded and resentful. Eventually, they band together and kill the father in an act of rebellion. But after the murder, they are overwhelmed by guilt. To cope with this guilt, they begin to idealize the father they destroyed, elevating him into a sacred figure. In Freud's view, this is how the earliest forms of religion and morality emerged. The father becomes a totem, a symbolic object of worship, and the prohibition against killing him evolves into a moral law.
They hated the father, who presented such a powerful obstacle to their craving for power and their sexual desires. But they loved and admired him too. After they had got rid of him and had satisfied their hate, and had carried out their wish for identification by devouring him, their love had to assert itself. This took the form of remorse. It set up the totem in the place of the father, and created the common feeling of guilt, which was the beginning of morality.
Freud later returns to this theory in Moses and Monotheism, where he applies it specifically to the emergence of monotheism and the figure of Moses. He argues that the psychological structure behind totemic religion, the murder, guilt, and symbolic restoration of the father, is also at work in the formation of Jewish monotheism. In Freud's interpretation, the god of monotheism is a return of the repressed father figure, a singular, moral authority who commands obedience and channels the unresolved ambivalence of the sons into structured religious worship.
The act of violence was subsequently undone by remorse. The father was elevated to a god.
Freud's theories on religion and belief have been the subject of sustained criticism. His most speculative work, particularly totem and taboo and Moses and monotheism, rests on mythologized reconstructions of early human history for which there is no anthropological evidence. The idea of a primal father murdered by a band of sons, later deified out of guilt, is not grounded in historical or archaeological data, but in psychoanalytic symbolism. Critics have also challenged his assumptions that individual psychological patterns, such as the Oedipus complex, can be directly scaled up to explain the origins of entire religious systems. This move, while conceptually bold, is methodologically weak and widely regarded as reductive. That said, not all of Freud's reflections on religion are dismissed. In The Future of an Illusion, his argument that religious belief functions as a form of psychological wish fulfillment, providing comfort in the face of fear, helplessness, and mortality, remains influential. Though still theoretical, this view has shaped modern understanding of belief, not only in religion, but in ideology and collective myth. In short, Freud's psychological critique of religion retains intellectual relevance, even as his historical reconstructions are broadly rejected. Religion is widely regarded as a complex phenomenon, sometimes harmful, sometimes healing. It can foster community, provide meaning, and even aid mental health. Freud too recognized that religious belief offers emotional comfort in the face of suffering, provides a sense of order, and helps regulate behavior within society. In his view, religion was a necessary stage in human development, a way to manage fear, enforce morality, and hold civilizations together before the rise of science and reason. But ultimately, Freud believed that humanity should move beyond these inherited illusions in pursuit of greater intellectual honesty and psychological maturity. For all of the positive aspects of religious belief, it's not always about truth, it's often about need. For Freud, religion was not evil, but it was dangerous, because it discouraged people from confronting reality and from growing up. He hoped that one day, humanity would mature out of religion, as a child outgrows fairy tales. Whether you accept his conclusions or not, his questions remain. Are our beliefs driven by reason, or by fear and wishful thinking? And if religion is a mirror, what does it show us about ourselves?